In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 45, it says that God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. I just love this verse. I love it so much. I lived in the Sahara Desert, and you know, when the sun shines in the Sahara, it shines on every single house in that village. The Lord doesn't put a little cloud over one. It's everybody. When the Lord sends the rain on Cardwell, he sends it on every house. There's nobody who misses out. The Lord causes his sun to shine on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. And this speaks to me of the fact that God does not have favourites. God has no favourites. And for that truth to sink into our hearts is an amazing thing. There's a few different levels we could say that God has no favourites. And first of all, just on the simple level of appearance. Some people are good looking and some people are less good looking. Some people are strong and tall, and some people have health issues and aren't strong and aren't tall. And to the Lord, he looks straight past all of that, and he looks at the heart. When Samuel was choosing a king for Israel, Jesse's eldest son stood there, and he was strong and tall, and the Lord said to Samuel, don't look on him because of his appearance. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. God has no favourites. And then when we look at position, you know, we have favourites in our society or in our church. They're the people who are in a certain position, or they have prestige, or there's some advantage for us to esteem these people. There's a beautiful chapter in Ephesians that talks about slaves and masters. And it talks about slaves, obey your masters, and masters, treat your slaves well, because God has no favourites. So between the people of the position and the people, the lowly people, God has no favourites. But to me it goes one step further. God has no favourites in terms of race. Just because in English we have a tradition that goes back hundreds of years, and we have a background, a faith and scripture that's been passed on for years, we can somehow get this sneaky suspicion that we're God's favourites. Did you know those 2,000 language groups, maybe they did something, we wouldn't say it in so many words, maybe there's something wrong that God hasn't favoured them so much. God's love for each one of those language groups is exactly the same as it is for me speaking English. God has no favourites. If today we have a huge amount of resources and Bibles and translations and bookstores and radios and videos and churches in the English language, and they don't in 2,000 languages in the world, it's not God's fault.
No.
It's because we haven't known, or because we haven't wanted to know, or because we've continued to pamper ourselves as a church in our own little world.
Yeah. Spiritual blindness.
And I don't know if any of you have read a little book. There's a little book that's came out, quite a controversial little book called The Shack. Has anyone read that? It's quite a controversial little book, and it stirred people up all over the place. I read it. My wife quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a little bit less, but there were some good things in it. And one of the things that I loved in that book is that every time, God was sort of a person in the book, and every time somebody was mentioned, God says, oh yes, Billy, I'm particularly fond of Billy. And then the next chapter someone else comes up and says, oh, Jane, I'm particularly fond of Jane. And then someone else, oh, I'm particularly fond of John. And as you go through, you see, God is particularly fond of everybody. His heart just goes out like a mother's heart to her child, to everybody. To every one of these 2,252 language groups, he's particularly fond. So much so that at the end of the story, if we look at the end, he wants every one of those language groups with him in heaven. Revelation 7:9, in the end John looked, and behold, he saw a great multitude from all the tribes and nations and peoples and tongues that nobody could count, but there were people there from every one. Every single one. The job's not done. And we believe that Jesus isn't coming back just yet, because he's promised that there'll be some from every tribe and every nation. And next time it rains in Cardwell, just remember that God causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God has no favourites.